Why is it that some people seem naturally confident in relationships while others constantly worry about being abandoned? And what if I told you the secret to transforming anxious attachment isn't what most people think it is? But before I reveal the counterintuitive truth that changed everything for me, you need to understand why traditional advice about anxious attachment actually makes the problem worse. For years, I lived in constant emotional turmoil. Every text message delay felt like rejection. Every neutral facial expression meant someone was losing interest. I would replay conversations endlessly, searching for hidden meanings that probably didn't exist. Sound familiar? But here's where it gets interesting, and this might shock you. The advice everyone gives about anxious attachment is completely backwards. They tell you to work on self-love, practice mindfulness, communicate your needs better. I tried all of that for years. It barely helped. In fact, it sometimes made things worse because I was still operating from the same fundamental misunderstanding about what anxious attachment actually is. But I can't explain what anxious attachment really is until you understand the 3 lies your brain tells you every single day. The third lie is the most dangerous, and once you recognize it, everything changes. However, the first 2 lies create the foundation that makes the third one so believable. The first lie your anxious brain tells you is that other people's emotions are your responsibility. You see someone looking stressed, and immediately your nervous system activates. What did I do wrong? How can I fix this? You become an emotional detective, constantly monitoring everyone's moods, convinced that their feelings are somehow connected to your worth as a person. This creates what I call the emotional surveillance trap. You're so busy watching everyone else that you completely lose touch with your own feelings and needs. But this is actually a survival mechanism, and understanding why your brain does this is crucial to what comes next. The second lie is even more insidious. Your brain convinces you that love is conditional and scarce. Every relationship feels like a performance where you're auditioning for someone's continued affection. You believe that if you're not constantly proving your worth, people will leave. This creates an exhausting cycle of people-pleasing and self-abandonment. But here's what's fascinating about this lie. It's not actually about the other person at all. It's about something much deeper, something that connects to that third lie I mentioned. And once you understand this connection, you'll see why all the traditional advice misses the mark completely. Now, the third lie is the most devastating, and it's the one that keeps you trapped in anxious attachment patterns. Are you ready for this? Your brain has convinced you that you are fundamentally defective and unworthy of love. Not just that you feel unworthy, but that you actually are unworthy. This isn't conscious. It's a core belief that operates in the background of everything you do. This belief makes you interpret every interaction through a lens of potential rejection. Someone doesn't text back immediately, it confirms you're too much. Someone needs space, it proves you're clingy and annoying. Someone seems distracted during a conversation. Obviously, they're realizing how boring you are. But here's the breakthrough that changed everything. Anxious attachment isn't actually about attachment at all. It's about identity. You're not afraid of being abandoned by others. You're afraid of being abandoned by yourself. You're afraid that if you stop constantly monitoring and managing everyone else's emotions, you'll have to face the emptiness you feel inside. Think about it. When you're anxiously attached, you're never actually present in relationships. You're always 3 steps ahead, trying to prevent some imaginary future rejection. You're not experiencing love. You're managing the threat of losing love. But this management system is what's preventing you from actually receiving love in the first place. The transformation begins when you realize that your anxious attachment is actually a sophisticated defense mechanism. It's your psyche's way of avoiding the deeper terror of truly being yourself with another person. Because being yourself feels incredibly dangerous when you don't actually like yourself. But this creates a cruel paradox, and understanding this paradox is essential to what I'm about to share next. The very strategies you use to avoid rejection are what create the rejection you fear. When you're constantly seeking reassurance, you're actually pushing people away. When you're monitoring everyone's emotions, you're not available for genuine connection. So how do you break free from this cycle? This is where everyone gets it wrong. They think the solution is to work on your relationship with others. Wrong. The solution is to completely revolutionize your relationship with yourself, but not in the way you think. The real work isn't about self-love or positive affirmations. Those are band-aids on a deeper wound. The real work is about developing what I call radical self-acceptance. This means accepting that you are anxiously attached, that you have these patterns, that you struggle with these fears, and that all of this is completely okay. Here's the counterintuitive part. The more you try to fix your anxious attachment, the more anxious you become, because you're still operating from the belief that there's something wrong with you that needs to be corrected. You're still rejecting parts of yourself, which reinforces the core wound that created the anxious attachment in the first place. But when you stop trying to fix yourself and start getting curious about yourself, everything shifts. Instead of judging your need for reassurance, you explore it. Where does this need come from? What is it trying to protect? What would happen if you didn't get the reassurance you're seeking? This curiosity creates space between you and your patterns. You're no longer identified with being anxiously attached. You're someone who sometimes experiences anxious attachment patterns. This might sound like a small distinction, but it changes everything. From this place of curious self-acceptance, you can start making different choices, not because you're trying to fix yourself, but because you're experimenting with what it feels like to show up differently in the world. You might choose to wait before sending that double text, not to punish yourself, but to see what happens in your body when you sit with the discomfort. You might choose to express a need directly instead of hoping someone will read your mind, not because you're following some relationship advice, but because you're curious about what authentic communication feels like. You might choose to set a boundary, not because you're being healthy, but because you want to experiment with honoring your own limits. This is how you transform anxious attachment into confidence. Confidence isn't the absence of anxiety. It's the ability to be with anxiety without letting it drive your decisions. It's trusting that you can handle whatever happens in your relationships because you've learned to handle what happens inside yourself. Real confidence comes from knowing that you're okay, regardless of how others respond to you. Not because you've convinced yourself you're perfect, but because you've accepted yourself as imperfect and lovable exactly as you are. This acceptance becomes the secure base you never had as a child. When you're no longer afraid of your own feelings, you stop needing others to manage them for you. When you're no longer afraid of rejection, you can show up authentically in relationships. When you're no longer afraid of abandonment, you can love freely without trying to control the outcome. This is the transformation from anxious attachment to confidence. It's not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before fear taught you to hide. Fear taught